What if I told you there's a biblical book filled with assassinations, civil wars, and a woman who drives a tent peg through a general's skull? Welcome to Judges, the Bible's darkest, most brutal, and surprisingly relevant book. This isn't your Sunday school version. Here, heroes are flawed, leaders are corrupt, and society collapses into chaos. From Gideon's 300 warriors defeating 135,000 enemies to Samson bringing down a temple with his bare hands, Judges reveals humanity's desperate need for divine leadership. It's the bridge between Moses' law and David's kingdom, showing what happens when everyone does what's right in their own eyes. Prepare for a journey through betrayal, supernatural strength, and moral decay that mirrors our world today. This is Judges as you've never seen it before. When Joshua died, Israel faced a moment that would define their future. The great leader who had brought them into the promised land was gone, and the people found themselves without a clear successor. The first chapter of Judges opens with a question that reveals their uncertainty. Who shall go up for us against the Canaanites first, to fight against them? The Lord's answer came swiftly. Judah would lead the charge. Judah didn't go alone. They called their brother tribe Simeon to join them, making a pact recorded in Judges 1:3. Come up with me into my allotted territory, that we may fight against the Canaanites, and I likewise will go with you into your allotted territory. This partnership would prove both successful and troubling. Their first major victory came against a king whose very name told a story of cruelty. Adoni-Bezek had made a habit of cutting off the thumbs and big toes of captured kings, keeping them under his table like dogs fighting for scraps. When Judah and Simeon captured him, they gave him exactly what he had given others. As Judges 1:7 records his words, 70 kings with their thumbs and their big toes cut off used to pick up scraps under my table. As I have done, so God has repaid me. But even in victory, the seeds of future problems were planted. The text of Judges 1:8 says, they conquered Jerusalem and set it on fire, yet just 11 verses later in Judges 1:21, we learn that the people of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites who lived in Jerusalem, so the Jebusites have lived with the people of Benjamin in Jerusalem to this day. The conquest was incomplete from the very beginning. Judah continued their campaign, taking Hebron and defeating the 3 giant sons of Anak. Caleb offered his daughter Achsah in marriage to whoever could capture Kiriath-Sepher. His nephew Othniel won the prize, and Achsah cleverly secured water sources for their new land. But for every victory, there was a compromise that would haunt Israel's future. The house of Joseph decided to tackle Bethel, a city that held deep meaning in Israel's history. This was where Jacob had dreamed of angels ascending and descending, where God had appeared to Abraham. But their method of conquest revealed how far they had already drifted from God's commands. According to Judges 1:24-25, they found a man coming out of the city and made him a deal. Please show us the way into the city, and we will deal kindly with you. The man betrayed his own people, and true to their word, they let him and his family escape. He went and built another city with the same name in the land of the Hittites. What seemed like mercy was actually disobedience. God had commanded them to destroy these cities completely. Tribe after tribe fell into the same pattern. Manasseh didn't drive out the inhabitants of their cities. Ephraim let the Canaanites live among them. Zebulun, Asher, and Naphtali all chose coexistence over obedience. The text repeats the same phrase over and over, but the Canaanites lived among them. Then came the moment that changed everything. Judges 2:1-3 records the appearance of the angel of the Lord at a place that would be named Bokim, meaning weepers. His message was devastating. I brought you up from Egypt and brought you into the land that I swore to give to your fathers. I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You shall break down their altars. But you have not obeyed my voice. What is this you have done? So now I say, I will not drive them out before you, but they shall become thorns in your sides, and their gods shall be a snare to you. The people's response, recorded in Judges 2:4-5, was immediate. As soon as the angel of the Lord spoke these words to all the people of Israel, the people lifted up their voices and wept. And they called the name of that place Bochim, and they sacrificed there to the Lord. They wept, but weeping without true repentance would prove to be empty tears. For a time, things seemed normal. Judges 2:6-7 tells us that after Joshua dismissed the people of Israel went each to his inheritance to take possession of the land. And the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great work that the Lord had done for Israel. But then came the turning point that would echo through generations. Judges 2:8-10 marks the end of an era. And Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110 years, and they buried him within the boundaries of his inheritance in Timnath-Heres, in the hill country of Ephraim, north of the mountain of Gash. And all that generation also were gathered to their fathers, and there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. This wasn't just about forgetting history, it was about losing a living relationship with God. The new generation had heard the stories, but they hadn't experienced the miracles. They hadn't seen the Red Sea part or watched the walls of Jericho fall. To them, these were just old tales their grandparents told. The result was predictable and tragic. Judges 2:11-13 describes their spiritual collapse. And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. And they abandoned the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. They went after other gods from among the gods of the peoples who were around them and bowed down to them. And they provoked the Lord to anger. They abandoned the Lord and served the Baals and the Ashtaroth. God's response was swift and painful. Judges 2:14-15 records his anger. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he gave them over to plunderers who plundered them. And he sold them into the hand of their surrounding enemies, so that they could no longer withstand their enemies. Whenever they marched out, the hand of the Lord was against them for harm, as the Lord had warned, and as the Lord had sworn to them. And they were in terrible distress. Yet even in judgment, God's mercy appeared. Judges 2:16 shows his heart. Then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hand of those who plundered them. But the people's response revealed how deep their rebellion ran. They wouldn't even listen to their deliverers. What happened next reveals something profound about God's ways. Instead of giving Israel easy victories, he deliberately left enemies in the land. Judges 3:14 explains his reasoning. Now these are the nations that the Lord left to test Israel by them, that is, all in Israel who had not experienced all the wars in Canaan. It was only in order that the generations of the people of Israel might know war, to teach war to those who had not known it before. These are the nations, the 5 lords of the Philistines, and all the Canaanites and the Sidonians and the Hivites who lived on Mount Lebanon, from Mount Baal Hermon as far as Lebo-Hamath. They were for the testing of Israel, to know whether Israel would obey the commandments of the Lord, which he commanded their fathers by Moses. This wasn't cruelty, it was wisdom. God knew that easy times make people forget their need for him. The remaining enemies would serve as a constant test of Israel's faithfulness. Would they trust in God's strength or rely on political alliances? Would they worship the Lord or bow to foreign gods? Israel failed the test almost immediately. Judges 3:5-6 records their compromise. So the people of Israel lived among the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And their daughters they took to themselves for wives, and their own daughters they gave to their sons, and they served their gods. Marriage led to worship, and worship led to abandonment of the true God. The very thing God had warned against through Moses came to pass. Israel began serving foreign gods and forgot their covenant identity. The consequences came quickly. Judges 3:7-8 shows the result. And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and the Asheroth. Therefore, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia. And the people of Israel served Cushan-Rishathaim 8 years. 8 long years under a foreign king whose name means doubly wicked. This was just the beginning of a pattern that would repeat throughout the book of Judges. When the people finally cried out to God in their distress, his response came through an unlikely deliverer. Othniel, the same man who had won Caleb's daughter by conquering a city, now found himself called to save his nation. Judges 3:9-10 records God's intervention. But when the people of Israel cried out to the Lord raised up a deliverer for the people of Israel who saved them, Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. The Spirit of the Lord was upon him, and he judged Israel. He went out to war, and the Lord gave Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia, into his hand, and his hand prevailed over Cushan-Rishathaim. Notice what made the difference: the Spirit of the Lord. This wasn't about human strength or military tactics. God's Spirit empowered Othniel for both warfare and leadership. The man who had once shown courage in battle now showed wisdom in judgment. The result was 40 years of peace, as recorded in Judges 3:11. So the land had rest 40 years. Then Othniel the son of Kenaz died. 40 years, an entire generation grew up without knowing war or oppression. Children played safely in their villages, farmers worked their fields without fear, and trade flourished throughout the land. But the text's final phrase hints at the problem ahead. Then Othniel, the son of Kenaz, died. The deliverer was gone, and with his death, the spiritual restraint that had kept Israel faithful began to weaken. The pattern was already clear. As long as the judge lived, the people remained somewhat faithful. When he died, they returned to their old ways. Othniel had shown what was possible when God's Spirit empowered a leader. He had demonstrated that victory came through divine power, not human strength. But he was just one man, and his influence died with him. Israel needed something more permanent than human judges, but they weren't ready to accept it yet. After Othniel's death, Israel's rebellion resumed with predictable results. Judges 3:12-14 records their next oppression. And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And the Lord strengthened Eglon, the king of Moab, against Israel, because they had done what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He gathered to himself the Ammonites and the Amalekites and went and defeated Israel. And they took possession of the city of palms. And the people of Israel served Eglon, the king of Moab, 18 years. 18 years under King Eglon, a name that means calf-like, hinting at his massive size. The city of palms, which was Jericho, fell under foreign control. The very place where God had given Israel their first great victory in the Promised Land now served as an enemy stronghold. When Israel finally cried out for help, God's choice of deliverer was surprising. Ehud came from Benjamin, the smallest tribe, and he was left-handed in a culture that saw this as a disadvantage. But God often chooses the unlikely to accomplish his purposes. Ehud's plan was daring and required perfect timing. He made himself a double-edged sword about 18 inches long and strapped it to his right thigh under his clothes. Since he was left-handed, guards checking for weapons would look on the left side where most people carried their swords. Judges 3:17-20 describes his approach to the king, and he presented the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. Now Eglon was a very fat man, and when Ehud had finished presenting the tribute, he sent away the people who carried the tribute. But he himself turned back at the idols near Gilgal and said, "I have a secret message for you, O king." And he commanded, "Silence." And all his attendants went out from his presence, and Ehud came to him as he was sitting alone in his cool, a roof chamber. And Ehud said, "I have a message from God for you." And he arose from his seat. The moment Eglon stood up, Ehud struck. Judges 3:21-22 records what happened. And Ehud reached with his left hand, took the sword from his right thigh, and thrust it into his belly. And the hilt also went in after the blade, and the fat closed over the blade, for he did not pull the sword out of his belly. And the dung came out. Ehud's escape was as clever as his attack. He locked the doors of the upper chamber and slipped away while the servants thought their king was using the bathroom. By the time they found Eglon's body, Ehud was already rallying Israel's army in the hill country of Ephraim. The victory was complete. Judges 3:28-29 records the battle's outcome. And he said to them, "Follow after me, for the Lord has given your enemies the Moabites into your hand." So they went down after him and seized the fords of the Jordan against the Moabites, and did not allow anyone to pass over. And they killed at that time about 10,000 of the Moabites, all strong, able-bodied men. Not a man escaped. Right after Ehud's story, the text gives us just one verse about another judge, but what a verse it is. Judges 3:31 simply states, "After him was Shamgar, the son of Anath, who killed 600 of the Philistines with an ox goad, and he also saved Israel." 600 trained warriors killed with a farming tool. The story seems almost impossible, yet there it stands in Scripture. An ox goad was essentially a long wooden stick with a metal point used to prod cattle while plowing. In Shamgar's hands, it became a weapon of mass destruction. The Philistines were no ordinary enemy. They were the sea peoples who had migrated from the Aegean region, bringing with them superior weapons and military technology. They controlled the coastal plains and represented a constant threat to Israel's security. For one man to kill 600 of their warriors was nothing short of miraculous. Shamgar's name suggests he might not have been a full Israelite. Son of Anath could refer to the Canaanite goddess of war. Yet God used even this outsider to deliver his people. The text doesn't give us details about how the victory happened or what led up to it. We're left with just the bare facts: one man, one tool, 600 enemies, and divine intervention. This brief story serves as a powerful reminder that God can use anyone and anything to accomplish his purposes. Military might, advanced weapons, superior numbers, none of these matter when God decides to act. A simple farming tool becomes a sword in the right hands at the right moment. Looking back over these early chapters of Judges, a clear cycle begins. To emerge, Israel serves God and experiences peace. Then they drift into idolatry and compromise. God allows enemies to oppress them until they cry out for help. Finally, he raises up a deliverer who brings temporary relief. But when that judge dies, the cycle starts all over again. Each time the pattern repeats, Israel seems to sink a little deeper. The first generation after Joshua simply neglected to finish driving out the Canaanites. The next generation actively embraced foreign gods and foreign marriages. With each cycle, the spiritual decline accelerates even in the midst of miraculous deliverances. The judges themselves reflect this decline. Othniel was Caleb's nephew, a man of proven character who brought 40 years of peace. Ehud was clever and effective, but his methods were darker, involving deception and assassination. Shamgar appears almost as a footnote, a mysterious figure who killed many enemies but left no lasting legacy. Most telling of all, the periods of peace grow shorter, while the times of oppression remain long. Othniel brought 40 years of rest. After Ehud's victory, the land had peace for 80 years, but this long period would prove to be the exception rather than the rule. Future judges would bring shorter and shorter periods of relief. The foundation was being laid for everything that would follow in Israel's history. Without strong central leadership, without a king to unite the tribes, without a consistent system of justice, the people did what seemed right in their own eyes. The result was chaos, violence, and spiritual decay that would only grow worse as the book of Judges continues. The stage was set for the dark chapters that lay ahead. The peace that followed Ehud's victory lasted 80 years, but it couldn't last forever. When Israel once again turned away from God, their punishment came from an unexpected direction. The 6th chapter of Judges opens with a familiar pattern, but a new enemy. The people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them into the hand of Midian 7 years. The Midianites weren't just another conquering army. They were destroyers of hope itself. Every year, like a plague of locusts, they would sweep across Israel's farmland, just as the crops were ready for harvest. Judges 6:3-4 describes their devastating strategy. For whenever the Israelites planted crops, the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east would come up against them. They would encamp against them and devour the produce of the land, as far as Gaza, and leave no sustenance in Israel, and no sheep or ox or donkey. Imagine working all year long, planting your fields, tending your crops, watching them grow tall and ready for harvest. Then, just when you're about to gather the food your family needs to survive the winter, enemy raiders appear on the horizon. They take everything, not just your grain, but your animals too. 7 years of this treatment had broken Israel's spirit. The people were forced to live like animals themselves. Judges 6:2 tells us that the hand of Midian overpowered Israel, and because of Midian, the people of Israel made for themselves the dens that are in the mountains and the caves and the strongholds. Families who should have been living in their own homes were hiding in caves, coming out only to scratch desperately for food. When people reach the bottom, they finally remember to look up. Judges 6:6-7 records their desperation. And Israel was brought very low because of Midian, and the people of Israel cried out for help to the Lord, when the people of Israel cried out to the Lord on account of the Midianites. But before God sent a deliverer, he sent a prophet with a message that cut straight to the heart of their problem. The prophet's words in Judges 6:8-10 didn't offer comfort, they offered truth. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, I led you up from Egypt and brought you out of the house of slavery. And I delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of all who oppressed you, and drove them out before you and gave you their land. And I said to you, I am the Lord your God. You shall not fear the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But you have not obeyed my voice. The message was clear. Their suffering wasn't random. It was the direct result of their disobedience. God had done everything for them, rescued them from Egypt, driven out their enemies, given them a rich land. All he asked in return was that they worship him alone and not bow down to false gods. But they had broken that simple agreement, and now they were paying the price. After the prophet delivered his hard message, something changed. The angel of the Lord appeared, not to a priest or a prince, but to a frightened farmer doing his work in secret. Judges 6:11 sets the scene. Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the terebinth at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abizrite, while his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. Picture this scene. Gideon wasn't threshing grain in the normal place where the wind could blow away the chaff. He was hiding in a winepress, a deep pit where grapes were usually crushed. This wasn't efficient, it was desperate. He was so afraid of the Midianites that he would rather work in secret than risk being seen. Then came the greeting that must have sounded like a cruel joke. The angel's words in Judges 6:12 seemed to mock the cowering farmer. The Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor, mighty warrior. This was a man hiding in a hole, afraid to thresh grain in public. If Gideon had been brave, he would have laughed at the absurdity. Instead, his response revealed both his pain and his doubt. Judges 6:13 records Gideon's bitter reply, "Please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his wonderful deeds that our fathers recounted to us, saying, 'Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt?' But now the Lord has forsaken us and given us into the hand of Midian." Gideon had heard the stories. Every Israelite child knew about the plagues in Egypt, the parting of the Red Sea, the manna in the wilderness. But those were old stories from his grandparents' time. Where was God now when the Midianites came, year after year, to steal their food and destroy their hope? The Lord's response was simple and direct, recorded in Judges 6:14. "Go in this your strength and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Do not I send you?" But Gideon wasn't buying it. His reply in Judges 6:15 showed just how unlikely a candidate he was. "Please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house." Everything about Gideon screamed wrong choice. He came from the weakest clan in his tribe, and he was the youngest and least important person in that weak clan. By human standards, he had nothing to recommend him as a military leader. But God's answer in Judges 6:16 revealed a different perspective. "But I will be with you, and you shall strike the Midianites as one man." Gideon needed proof. Like most people facing an impossible task, he asked for a sign. He prepared an offering, a young goat and unleavened bread, and brought it to the angel. What happened next removed all doubt. Judges 6:21-22 describes the miraculous confirmation. "Then the angel of the Lord reached out the tip of the staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened cakes. And fire sprang up from the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened cakes. And the angel of the Lord vanished from his sight. Then Gideon perceived that he was the angel of the Lord. And Gideon said, 'Alas, O Lord God, for now I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face, fire from a rock, consuming the sacrifice completely.'" This was clearly supernatural, but instead of being thrilled, Gideon was terrified. He thought seeing God's angel meant certain death. The Lord's gentle response in Judges 6:23 calmed his fears. "Peace be to you. Do not fear, you shall not die." That night Gideon built an altar on the spot and called it, "The Lord is Peace." It was the first step in his transformation from fearful farmer to faithful warrior. God wasn't finished with Gideon. That very night, he gave his newly chosen judge a dangerous assignment. Judges 6:25-26 records the command. "That night the Lord said to him, 'Take your father's bull, and the second bull 7 years old, and pull down the altar of Baal that your father has, and cut down the Asherah that is beside it, and build an altar to the Lord your God on the top of the stronghold here, in the ordered way. And take the second bull, and offer it as a burnt offering with the wood of the Asherah, that you shall cut down.'" This wasn't just about building a new altar, it was about tearing down the old one. Gideon's own father, Joash, had built an altar to Baal right there in their hometown. For years, the family had been hedging their bets, worshipping both the God of Israel and the Canaanite fertility god. Now God was demanding complete loyalty. The task required real courage. Destroying Baal's altar would enrage the entire community. But notice how Gideon approached the problem. Judges 6:27 shows his strategy. "So Gideon took 10 men of his servants and did as the Lord had told him. But because he was too afraid of his family and the men of the town to do it by day, he did it by night. He obeyed, but he did it under cover of darkness." This wasn't the bold action of a confident warrior. It was the careful obedience of a man still struggling with fear. Yet it was obedience nonetheless. Sometimes courage isn't about feeling brave. It's about doing what's right even when you're scared. When morning came, the townspeople discovered what had happened. Their reaction was swift and violent. Judges 6:28-30 describes their rage. When the men of the town rose early in the morning, behold, the altar of Baal was broken down, and the Asherah beside it was cut down, and the second bull was offered on the altar that had been built. And they said to one another, "Who has done this thing?" And after they made search and inquired, they said, "Gideon the son of Joash has done this thing." Then the men of the town said to Joash, "Bring out your son, that he may die, for he has broken down the altar of Baal and cut down the Asherah beside it." They wanted Gideon's blood. In their minds, he had committed an unforgivable crime against their God. They demanded that his own father hand him over for execution, but something unexpected happened. Joash defended his son. The father's response in Judges 6:31-32 was brilliant. But Joash said to all who stood against him, "Will you contend for Baal, or will you save him? Whoever contends for him shall be put to death by morning. If he is a god, let him contend for himself, because his altar has been broken down." Therefore on that day Gideon was called Jerubbaal, that is to say, "Let Baal contend against him," because he broke down his altar. Joash turned the tables on the angry crowd. If Baal was really a god, why did he need humans to defend him? Let Baal take his own revenge. It was a logical argument that left the mob speechless and gave Gideon a new name, Jerubbaal, meaning, "Let Baal contend." News traveled fast in the ancient world, especially bad news. Word of Gideon's altar-smashing reached the enemies camped beyond Israel's borders. The Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern peoples decided it was time to end Israel's rebellion once and for all. Judges 6:33 describes their massive mobilization. Now all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east came together, and they crossed the Jordan and encamped in the valley of Jezreel. This wasn't just another raiding party coming to steal grain. This was an army bent on conquest, camping in Israel's most fertile valley. The threat was existential. If Israel didn't act now, there might not be an Israel left to save. But something had changed in Gideon. The man who had been threshing wheat in secret was about to become a military commander. Judges 6:34 records the moment of transformation. But the Spirit of the Lord clothed Gideon, and he sounded the trumpet, and the Abiezrites were called out to follow him. The Hebrew word for clothed suggests that God's Spirit didn't just come upon Gideon. It wrapped around him like armor, covering his weaknesses and empowering him for battle. The same Spirit that had empowered Othniel and would later empower Samson now transformed a frightened farmer into a warrior. Gideon's trumpet call echoed across the hills, and men began to respond. First came his own clan, the Abiezrites. Then the message spread. Judges 6:35 shows the growing response. And he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, and they too were called out to follow him. And he sent messengers to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they came up to meet them. 32,000 men answered the call, not a huge army by ancient standards, but large enough to give hope. Warriors came from 4 different tribes, united under Gideon's leadership. The man who had complained about being the least in the weakest clan now commanded a force that represented nearly half of Israel's tribes. Fear was transforming into faith, but the change wasn't complete yet. Gideon still needed reassurance that this was really God's plan and not a recipe for disaster. Even with an army gathering around him and the Spirit of the Lord upon him, Gideon still struggled with doubt. The stakes were too high to get this wrong. If he led Israel's army into battle and lost, the nation might be wiped out completely. He needed absolute certainty that God was really with him. So he devised a test. Judges 6:36-37 records his request. Then Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by my hand as you have said, behold, I am laying a fleece of wool on the threshing floor." If there is dew on the fleece alone, and it is dry on all the ground, then I shall know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said." Think about what Gideon was asking for. Normally, dew forms on everything exposed to the night air. Grass, rocks, cloth. For the fleece to be soaking wet while the ground around it stayed completely dry would violate the laws of nature. Only God could make that happen. The next morning brought exactly what Gideon had requested. Judges 6:38 describes the result. And it was so. When he rose early next morning and squeezed the fleece, he wrung enough dew from the fleece to fill a bowl with water. A whole bowl of water from one sheep's fleece, while the ground remained dry. This was clearly supernatural. But instead of being satisfied, Gideon asked for one more test. His second request in Judges 6:39 shows how hard it was for him to believe. Then Gideon said to God, "Let not your anger be kindled against me, and let me speak just once more. Please let me test just once more with the fleece. Please let it be dry on the fleece only, and on all the ground let there be dew." This second test was actually harder than the first. Wool naturally absorbs moisture from the air, so keeping it dry while everything else got wet required even more divine intervention. But God patiently granted this request too. Judges 6:40 confirms the miracle. And God did so that night. And it was dry on the fleece only, and on all the ground there was dew. 2 miracles, 2 confirmations, 2 signs that God was indeed with Gideon. Some people criticize Gideon for asking for signs, but God didn't seem angry about it. He understood that his chosen judge needed reassurance before leading Israel into what looked like a hopeless battle. Faith doesn't always come easily, and God was willing to work with Gideon's weakness to build his confidence. With divine confirmation in hand, Gideon moved his army to a strategic position. They camped at the spring of Harod, while the Midianite army spread across the valley below like a dark cloud. But before the battle could begin, God had a surprising message for his general. Judges 7:2 records the divine strategy. The Lord said to Gideon, "The people with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand, lest Israel boast over me, saying, 'My own hand has saved me.'" 32,000 soldiers seemed like barely enough to face the massive enemy force, but God said it was too many. If Israel won with a large army, they would take credit for the victory instead of giving glory to God. The lesson had to be unmistakable. This victory would come from heaven, not from human strength. The first test was simple but revealing. Judges 7:3 gives the instructions. "Now therefore proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, 'Whoever is fearful and trembling, let him return home and hurry away from Mount Gilead.'" The result was shocking. Judges 7:3 continues, "Then 22,000 talents of the people returned, and 10,000 remained. More than 2/3 of the army went home." These weren't cowards, necessarily. They were honest men who knew they weren't ready to die in battle. But their departure left Gideon with just 10,000 soldiers facing an enemy that vastly outnumbered them. Still, God wasn't finished reducing the army. Judges 7:4 brought another surprise. "And the Lord said to Gideon, 'The people are still too many. Take them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. And any one of whom I say to you, this one shall go with you, shall go with you. And any one of whom I say to you, this one shall not go with you, shall not go with you.'" The test God designed was strange but effective. As the soldiers drank from the stream, God watched how they approached the water. Judges 7:5-6 describes what happened. "So he brought the people down to the water. And the Lord said to Gideon, 'Everyone who laps the water with his tongue as a dog laps, you shall set by himself. Likewise, everyone who kneels down to drink.' and the number of those who lapped, putting their hands to their mouths, was 300 men, but all the rest of the people knelt down to drink water. Most of the soldiers knelt down and put their faces right to the water to drink, but 300 men remained alert, cupping water in their hands and lapping it quickly while keeping their eyes up, watching for danger. These were the men who stayed ready for battle even while satisfying their thirst. God's choice was clear. Judges 7:7 records the final army size. And the Lord said to Gideon, "With the 300 men who lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hand, and let all the others go, every man to his home." 300 men against countless thousands. By any human calculation, it was suicide. But God specializes in impossible victories, and this would be one of his greatest demonstrations of power. Even with God's promises, the prospect of fighting with just 300 men was terrifying. God knew Gideon needed one final encouragement before the battle. Judges 7:9-11 records his gentle provision. That same night the Lord said to him, "Arise, go down against the camp, for I have given it into your hand. But if you are afraid to go down to the camp with Purah your servant, and you shall hear what they say, and afterward your hands shall be strengthened to go down against the camp." Then he went down with Purah his servant to the outposts of the armed men who were in the camp. God told Gideon to spy on the enemy camp, and he even acknowledged Gideon's fear without condemning him. If he was too scared to go alone, he could take his servant with him. This wasn't a command, it was an invitation to gain courage. What Gideon overheard was better than any military intelligence report. Judges 7:13-14 captures the conversation between two enemy soldiers. When Gideon came, behold, a man was telling a dream to his comrade, and he said, "Behold, I dreamed a dream, and behold, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian, and came to the tent and struck it, so that it fell, and turned it upside down, so that the tent lay flat." And his comrade answered, "This is no other than the sword of Gideon the son of Joash, a man of Israel. God has given into his hand Midian and all the camp." A barley cake, the cheapest, most common bread that poor people ate, had destroyed the entire Midianite camp in the dream. Even the enemy soldiers knew what it meant. God was going to give Gideon victory over their mighty army. Fear had already begun to work in the enemy ranks. Gideon's response showed how much he had changed. Judges 7:15 records his reaction. As soon as Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, he worshipped. And he returned to the camp of Israel and said, "Arise, for the Lord has given the host of Midian into your hand." The frightened farmer had become a confident commander. He worshipped God right there in enemy territory, then returned to rally his tiny army for an attack that defied all military logic. The battle plan was as unconventional as the army size. Judges 7:16-18 describes Gideon's strategy. "And he divided the 300 men into 3 companies and put trumpets into the hands of all of them, and empty jars with torches inside the jars. And he said to them, 'Look at me and do likewise. When I come to the outskirts of the camp, do as I do. When I blow the trumpet, I and all who are with me, then blow the trumpets also on every side of all the camp, and shout for the Lord and for Gideon. No swords, no spears, no shields, just trumpets, torches, and clay jars.' The plan required perfect timing and absolute faith that God would do the fighting for them. At midnight, when the enemy was deep in sleep, 300 men would surround the massive camp and create the impression of a huge attacking army. The assault began exactly as planned. Judges 7:19-20 captures the moment. So Gideon and the 100 men who were with him came to the outskirts of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, when they had just set the watch. And they blew the trumpets and smashed the jars that were in their hands. Then the 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the jars. They held in their left hands the torches, and in their right hands the trumpets to blow. And they cried out, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon!" Imagine the chaos in the enemy camp. Soldiers woke to the sound of trumpets on every side, torches blazing in the darkness, and battle cries echoing from all directions. In the confusion and panic, they couldn't tell how many attackers surrounded them. It seemed like a massive army had appeared from nowhere. What happened next was exactly what God had planned. Judges 7:22 describes the divine victory. When they blew the 300 trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword against his comrade and against all the army, and the army fled as far as Beth-shittah toward Zererah, as far as the border of Abel-meholah by Tabbath. The enemy army destroyed itself. In the darkness and confusion, Midianite soldiers couldn't tell friend from foe. They attacked each other while Gideon's men stood at a safe distance, holding their torches and blowing their trumpets. By dawn, the valley was littered with enemy bodies, and the survivors were fleeing in panic. Victory was sweet, but it wasn't complete. Many of the enemy had escaped across the Jordan River, and among them were the Midianite kings who had orchestrated 7 years of oppression. Gideon wasn't about to let them get away. The pursuit that followed would reveal both his determination and his growing taste for personal vengeance. First, he called for help from other tribes. Judges 7:23-24 shows his strategy. And the men of Israel were called out from Naphtali and from Asher and from all Manasseh, and they pursued after Midian. Gideon sent messengers throughout all the hill country of Ephraim, saying, "Come down against the Midianites and capture the waters against them as far as Beth-barah and also the Jordan." So all the men of Ephraim were called out, and they captured the waters as far as Beth-barah and also the Jordan. The Ephraimites proved their worth by capturing the river crossings and cutting off the enemy's escape route. Their success was impressive. Judges 7:25 records their achievement. And they captured the 2 princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. They killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and Zeb they killed at the winepress of Zeb. Then they pursued Midian, and they brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon across the Jordan. 2 enemy princes dead, their heads brought as trophies to Gideon. But while the other tribes celebrated this victory, Gideon and his original 300 men pressed on across the Jordan. They were exhausted from the night battle and the long chase, but their mission wasn't finished. The main Midianite kings, Zebah and Zalmunna, were still alive and fleeing with 15,000 soldiers. The pursuit led into the desert, where Gideon faced a bitter disappointment. His own people refused to help him. Judges 8:4-6 describes the rejection. And Gideon came to the Jordan and crossed over, he and the 300 men who were with him, exhausted yet pursuing. He said to the men of Succoth, "Please give loaves of bread to my followers, for they are exhausted, and I am pursuing after Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." And the officials of Succoth said, "Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your army?" The men of Succoth, fellow Israelites, looked at Gideon's tiny, exhausted force and decided they were backing the wrong side. They refused even basic food for the weary warriors, essentially betting that the Midianite kings would survive and take revenge on anyone who helped their pursuers. The people of Penuel gave the same insulting response. Both cities were hedging their bets, afraid to support Gideon until they were sure he would win. Their cowardice enraged the judge, and he promised they would pay for their betrayal once the battle was over. The final confrontation came in the deserted Karkor. Judges 8:10-12 describes the last battle. Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor with their army, about 15,000 men, all who were left of all the army of the people of the east, for there had fallen 120,000 men who drew the sword. And Gideon went up by the way of the tent dwellers, east of Nobah and Jogbehah, and attacked the army, for the army felt secure. And Zebah and Zalmunna fled And he pursued them and captured the two kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna. And he threw all the army into a panic. The numbers are staggering. 120,000 enemy warriors had already died, leaving just 15,000 survivors with their kings. Gideon's surprise attack scattered this remnant and captured the leaders who had terrorized Israel for 7 long years. But when Gideon questioned the captured kings, the conversation took a dark turn. Judges 8:18-19 reveals a personal motive that had been driving him. Then he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, "Where are the men whom you killed at Tabor?" They answered, "As you are, so were they. Every one of them resembled the sons of a king." And he said, "They were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if you had saved them alive, I would not kill you." The Midianite kings had killed Gideon's own brothers during their years of oppression. What had begun as a mission to deliver Israel had become a quest for personal revenge. When the kings tried to manipulate him by asking to die by his hand rather than be executed, by his young son Gideon granted their wish. Judges 8:21 records the end. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said, "Rise yourself and fall upon us, for as the man is, so is his strength." And Gideon arose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and he took the crescent ornaments that were on the necks of their camels. The great victory was complete, but it was stained with personal vengeance. On his way home, Gideon kept his promises to the cities that had refused to help him. He taught the men of Succoth a lesson with desert thorns and briars, and he tore down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city. Justice and revenge had become tangled together in Gideon's heart. The reluctant warrior had become a victorious judge, but the seeds of future problems were already visible in his actions. The boy who had hidden in a winepress was now a man who commanded armies and executed kings, but power was beginning to change him in ways that would soon create new troubles for Israel. Victory has a way of bringing out the worst in people. While Gideon was still pursuing the Midianite kings across the Jordan, trouble was brewing back home. The men of Ephraim, who had played a crucial role in cutting off the enemy's escape and capturing 2 Midianite princes, were furious about being left out of the initial battle. Their complaint came as soon as Gideon returned from his desert pursuit. The 8th chapter of Judges opens with their angry confrontation. Then the men of Ephraim said to him, "What is this that you have done to us, not to call us when you went to fight against Midian?" And they accused him fiercely. This wasn't just wounded pride, it was a threat to national unity. Ephraim was one of the most powerful tribes in Israel, and their warriors had just proven their worth by capturing enemy princes. They felt insulted that Gideon had gathered his army from other tribes while excluding them from the main battle. In their minds, they deserved to be included from the beginning, not called in later to mop up fleeing enemies. Civil war had started over smaller disputes than this. The tribes of Israel were always quick to take offense, always ready to fight each other instead of their common enemies. But Gideon had learned more than military tactics during his transformation from farmer to judge. He had learned the art of diplomacy. His response in Judges 8:2-3 was a masterpiece of humble wisdom. And he said to them, "What have I done now in comparison with you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the grape harvest of Abiezer? God has given into your hands the princes of Midian, Oreb, and Zeb. What was I able to do in comparison with you?" Then their anger against him subsided when he had said this. Notice what Gideon did. Instead of defending himself or pointing out that God had called him to lead the battle, he praised Ephraim's contribution. He compared his own victory to a grape harvest, while calling their capture of the princes the better achievement, like gleaning grapes that turned out to be more valuable than the main harvest. He gave them the honor they craved, and their anger melted away like ice in the sun. This was the same man who had once hidden in a winepress, now showing wisdom that prevented civil wars. His humility saved Israel from tearing itself apart, just when they should have been celebrating their greatest victory in years. But Gideon's diplomacy had its limits. When he encountered the cities that had refused to help his exhausted men during the pursuit, his response was very different. The men of Succoth had mocked him, asking sarcastically in Judges 8:6 whether he already had the hands of the Midianite kings before they would give his army food. Now that he actually did have Zebah and Zalmunna as prisoners, it was time to settle accounts. After such a complete victory over the Midianites, it's not surprising that Israel wanted to make Gideon their permanent leader. The request came from representatives of all the people, and it seemed perfectly reasonable. Here was a man who had delivered them from 7 years of oppression, who had shown both military genius and diplomatic skill. Why not make him king? Their offer, recorded in Judges 8:22, was straightforward and tempting. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you and your son and your grandson also, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian." They weren't just asking him to be a temporary judge. They wanted to establish a royal dynasty with Gideon as the founder. His family would rule Israel for generations to come, creating the stability and continuity that the nation had been missing. Gideon's response was theologically correct and politically wise. Judges 8:23 records his refusal. Gideon said to them, "I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." He understood that Israel already had a king, the Lord God himself. To accept human kingship would be to usurp God's authority and violate the covenant that made Israel different from other nations. But then Gideon made a request that would prove more destructive than accepting the crown would have been. Judges 8:24-26 describes his fateful decision. And Gideon said to them, "Let me make a request of you. Every one of you give me the earrings from his spoil." For they had golden earrings because they were Ishmaelites. And they answered, "We will willingly give them." And they spread a cloak, and every man threw in it the earrings from his spoil. And the weight of the golden earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, besides the crescent ornaments, and the pendants and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, and besides the chains that were about the necks of their and camels, 1,700 shekels of gold. That's about 43 pounds of pure gold, worth a fortune by any standard. Add to that the royal ornaments, purple garments fit for kings, and jeweled chains taken from royal camels. And Gideon had accumulated wealth beyond imagination. The grateful people were happy to give their deliverer whatever he asked for, not realizing they were funding their own spiritual destruction. But what Gideon did with this treasure revealed how far he had drifted from his humble beginnings as a frightened farmer. Judges 8:27 records the tragic mistake, and Gideon made an ephod of it and put it in his city in Ophrah, and all Israel whored after it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and to his family. An ephod was supposed to be a simple linen garment worn by priests when they consulted God. But Gideon's golden ephod became something very different, a magnificent object that drew people's worship away from the invisible God to something they could see and touch. People came from all over Israel to admire the beautiful golden ephod, and gradually they began to worship it instead of worshiping the God it was meant to honor. The irony was devastating. The man who had once torn down his father's altar to Baal under cover of darkness now created his own religious snare in broad daylight. The judge who had refused to be Israel's king became the creator of an idol that would corrupt their worship for the rest of his life. Gideon had 70 sons by his many wives, but he also had one son by a concubine who lived in Shechem. This son, Abimelech, grew up watching his half-brothers enjoy the privileges and inheritance that came with being legitimate sons, while he remained an outsider looking in. When Gideon died, and Israel forgot their loyalty to his family, Abimelech saw an opportunity to seize what he felt was rightfully his. His plan was simple but brutal. The 9th chapter of Judges opens with Abimelech's clever manipulation of his mother's relatives in Shechem. Now Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem to his mother's brothers, and said to them and to the whole clan of his mother's family, "Say in the ears of all the leaders of Shechem, which is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Jerubbaal rule over you, or that one rule over you? Remember also that I am your bone and your flesh." Notice how cleverly Abimelech twisted the situation. His father had refused to be king and had never established any of his sons as rulers over Israel. But Abimelech presented the choices. If the 70 brothers were already planning to take power and divide Israel among themselves, better to have one king from their own city, he argued, one who shared their blood, than to be ruled by 70 strangers who would treat Shechem as just another conquered territory. The appeal to tribal loyalty and family connections worked perfectly. Judges 9:3 shows their enthusiastic response, and his mother's brothers spoke all these words on his behalf in the ears of all the leaders of Shechem, and their hearts inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, "He is our brother." Blood was thicker than gratitude in their minds. They would rather support their relative than remain loyal to the memory of Gideon, who had saved all Israel from the Midianites. Money sealed the deal. Judges 9:4 records their financial backing, and they gave him 70 pieces of silver out of the house of Baal Berith, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless fellows who followed him. The silver came from the temple of their false god, Baal Berith, and it bought exactly the kind of men Abimelech needed for what he planned to do. Mercenaries with no conscience and no loyalty except to whoever paid them the most. What happened next was one of the most horrific massacres in Israel's bloody history. Judges 9:5 describes the slaughter with chilling brevity. "And he went to his father's house at Ophrah and killed his brothers the sons of Jerubbaal, 70 men on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left, for he hid himself. 70 men killed on a single stone, like animals being butchered for sacrifice. These weren't enemies in battle or criminals facing justice. They were Abimelech's own half-brothers, sons of the man who had delivered Israel from 7 years of Midianite oppression. The massacre was both fratricide and sacrilege, carried out at the very place where Gideon had built an altar to honor the Lord. Jotham wasn't about to let his brother's murder go without response, but he was just one young man against an entire city and their newly crowned king. He needed a way to speak truth to power without getting himself killed in the process. His solution was brilliant. He would tell them a story that revealed the true nature of what they had done. The opportunity came during Abimelech's coronation ceremony. As the crowds gathered to celebrate their new king, a lone figure appeared on Mount Gerizim, the traditional place for pronouncing blessings on Israel. Judges 9:7 sets the dramatic scene. When it was told to Jotham, he went and stood on top of Mount Gerizim and cried aloud and said to them, "Listen to me, you leaders of Shechem, that God may listen to you." From his position high on the mountain, Jotham could be heard throughout the valley below, but he was too far away for anyone to stop him before he finished speaking. What he said next was a parable that cut straight to the heart of their foolishness and would prove to be devastatingly prophetic. The fable, recorded in Judges 9:8-15, was a masterpiece of political satire. The trees once went out to anoint a king over them, and they said to the olive tree, "Reign over us." But the olive tree said to them, "Shall I leave my abundance, by which gods and men are honored, and go hold sway over the trees?" And the trees said to the fig tree, "You come and reign over us." But the fig tree said to them, "Shall I leave my sweetness and my good fruit, and go hold sway over the trees?" And the trees said to the vine, "You come and reign over us." But The vine said to them, "Shall I leave my wine that cheers God and men, and go hold sway over the trees?" Then all the trees said to the bramble, "You come and reign over us." And the bramble said to the trees, "If in good faith you are anointing me king over you, then come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon." The meaning was unmistakable to everyone listening. The useful, productive trees, olive, fig, and vine, all refused to abandon their valuable work to become king. Only the worthless bramble, a thorny bush that produced nothing but trouble, was willing to rule. And its promise of protection was ridiculous. Who would seek shade under a bramble bush? Instead of shelter, it offered only the threat of fire that would destroy even the mighty cedars of Lebanon. Jotham then applied his parable directly to the situation in Shechem. Judges 9:16-20 records his devastating analysis. "Now therefore, if you acted in good faith and integrity when you made Abimelech king, and if you have dealt well with Jerubbaal and his house, and have done to him as his deeds deserved, for my father fought for you and risked his life, and delivered you from the hand of Midian. And you have risen up against my father's house this day, and have killed his sons, 70 men on one stone, and have made Abimelech, the son of his female servant, king over the leaders of Shechem, because he is your kinsman. If you then have acted in good faith and integrity with Jerubbaal and with his house this day, then rejoice in Abimelech, and let him also rejoice in you. But if not, let fire come out from Abimelech and devour the leaders of Shechem and Beth Millo, and let fire come out from the leaders of Shechem and Beth Millo and devour Abimelech." For 3 years, Abimelech's rule seemed secure. He had eliminated his rivals, gained the support of Shechem, and established himself as Israel's first king since the Judges began. But power built on murder and maintained by fear has a way of destroying itself from within. The very people who had helped him seize control began to have second thoughts about their choice. The turning point came when God decided to intervene directly in human affairs. Judges 9:23 describes the divine judgment that would fulfill Jotham's prophecy. "And God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the leaders of Shechem, and the leaders of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech." This wasn't random political upheaval or natural human ambition. It was divine justice working through the natural consequences of their choices. The rebellion started small, with the leaders of Shechem setting ambushes on the mountain roads, robbing merchants and travelers who passed through their territory. This wasn't just ordinary crime for profit. It was a direct challenge to Abimelech's authority. If he couldn't keep the roads safe, what good was he as a king? Into this brewing conflict came a man named Baal, an outsider who saw opportunity in the growing discontent. During their harvest festival, when wine flowed freely and inhibitions were lowered, he stood up and questioned everything they had done. His speech, recorded in Judges 9:28-29, was inflammatory and effective. And Baal, the son of Ebed, said, "Who is Abimelech, and who are we of Shechem, that we should serve him? Is he not the son of Jerubbaal, and is not Zebul his officer? Serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem. But why should we serve him? Would that this people were under my hand, then I would remove Abimelech." Wine and wounded pride made for a dangerous combination. Baal stirred up the crowd by reminding them that they were descendants of Hamor, the original ruler of Shechem, while Abimelech was just the bastard son of an outsider. If Baal were in charge, he boasted, he would challenge Abimelech to open battle and rid them of their unwanted king. When the battle came, Abimelech was victorious, but his response revealed how completely power had corrupted him. Judges 9:45 describes his total destruction of the city that had made him king, and Abimelech fought against the city all that day. He captured the city and killed the people who were in it, and he razed the city and sowed it with salt, the tea, and came at Thebez, where a woman's millstone crushed Abimelech's skull, exactly as Jotham had prophesied. After the chaos and violence of Abimelech's reign, Israel desperately needed stability. God provided it through two judges who ruled in peace, bringing the kind of steady leadership that doesn't make headlines but keeps nations functioning. Judges 10:1-2 introduces the first peaceful leader. After Abimelech there arose to save Israel Tola the son of Puah, son of Dodo, a man of Issachar, and he lived at Shamir in the hill country of Ephraim. And he judged Israel 23 years. Then he died and was buried at Shamir, 23 years of quiet service. The text doesn't tell us about any great battles Tola fought or miraculous victories he won. There's no mention of enemy oppression during his time or dramatic deliverances. Sometimes the best leadership prevents problems rather than solving crises. Tola arose to save Israel not through warfare, but through wise and steady judgment that allowed the nation to heal. After Tola died, another peaceful judge took his place, who brought visible prosperity to the land. Judges 10:3-5 describes Jair's remarkable rule. After him arose Jair the Gileadite, who judged Israel 22 years. And he had 30 sons, who rode on 30 donkeys, and they had 30 cities, called Havoth Jair to this day, which are in the land of Gilead. And Jair died and was buried in Canaan. 30 sons, riding 30 donkeys and controlling 30 cities, showed unprecedented expansion and wealth. Donkeys were valuable animals, and having 30 indicated substantial resources. Most impressive, these cities bore his family name to this day, showing his legacy was permanent. These weren't temporary conquests that disappeared when he died. They were established settlements that lasted for generations. Combined, Tola and Jair gave Israel 45 years of peace, prosperity, and steady growth. Their reigns proved that the nation could thrive under godly leadership, even when that leadership wasn't flashy or miraculous. But peace and prosperity often lead to spiritual complacency, preparing the stage for Israel's next great rebellion. The 45 years of peace under Tola and Jair had been a golden age, but prosperity made people forget the source of their blessings. When both judges were dead, the nation's true spiritual condition became horrifyingly clear in the most comprehensive apostasy in Israel's history. Judges 10:6 describes their rebellion in breathtaking scope. The people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and served the Baals and the Ashtaroth, the gods of Syria, the gods of Sidon, the gods of Moab, the gods of the Ammonites, and the gods of the Philistines. And they forsook the Lord and did not serve him. This wasn't just adding a few extra gods to their worship. This was a complete spiritual marketplace where Israel was serving 7 different groups of false deities. They had become spiritual prostitutes, chasing after every deity they encountered, while completely abandoning the God who had made them a nation. The divine response matched the scope of their rebellion. Judges 10:7-8 records God's judgment. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of the Philistines and into the hand of the Ammonites, and they crushed and oppressed the people of Israel that year. For 18 years they oppressed all the people of Israel who were beyond the Jordan in the land of the Amorites, which is in Gilead. 2 powerful enemies attacking from opposite directions, Philistines from the west, Ammonites from the east. For 18 years, Israel was caught in a vice, with enemy armies crushing them from both sides. Their comfortable prosperity vanished, as foreign soldiers plundered their wealth and enslaved their people. When they finally cried out, God's response was different from his previous quick interventions. His words in Judges 10:13-14 were harsh, but deserved. Yet you have forsaken me and served other gods. Therefore I will save you no more. Go and cry out to the gods whom you have chosen. Let them save you in the time of your distress. But Israel's repentance this time was genuine. Judges 10:15-16 records both their words and actions. And the people of Israel said to the Lord, "We have sinned. Do to us whatever seems good to you. Only please deliver us this day." So they put away the foreign gods from among them and served the Lord. And he became impatient over the misery of Israel. They didn't just apologize, they actually destroyed their idols. This concrete action proved their sincerity, and God's heart was moved to compassion despite his justified anger. With Israel genuinely repentant, they faced an immediate military crisis. The Ammonites had assembled a massive army for what looked like Israel's final battle. Judges 10:17-18 describes the situation. Then the Ammonites were called to arms, and they encamped in Gilead. And the people of Israel came together, and they encamped at Mizpah. And the people, the leaders of Gilead, said one to another, "Who is the man who will begin to fight against the Ammonites? He shall be head over all the inhabitants of Gilead." They had troops but no general. Their desperate offer was dangerous, permanent political authority to whoever would command their army. The man they turned to was living in exile, leading a mercenary band in the land of Tob. Judges 11:1-3 tells Jephthah's story. Now Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty warrior, but he was the son of a prostitute. Gilead was the father of Jephthah, and Gilead's wife also bore him sons. And when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, "You shall not have an inheritance in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman." Then Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob, and worthless fellows collected around Jephthah and went out with him. The illegitimate son had been driven away by his half-brothers when it came time to divide their father's inheritance. Exile had made him strong. Leading desperate mercenaries required both military skill and political cunning. These were exactly the qualities Gilead needed. When the elders came begging for help, Jephthah confronted their hypocrisy. His words in Judges 11:7 cut deep. Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, "Did you not hate me and drive me out of my father's house? Why have you come to me now when you are in distress?" Their response was brutally honest. Judges 11:8 records their admission. And the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, "That is why we have turned to you now, that you may go with us and fight against the Ammonites and be our head over all the inhabitants of Gilead." The deal was sealed publicly. Judges 11:11 records the agreement. So Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and leader over them. And Jephthah spoke all his words before the Lord at Mizpah. The rejected bastard had become his people's only hope for survival. God's providence had used their cruelty to prepare the very deliverer they would need in their darkest hour. Before leading Israel into battle against the Ammonites, Jephthah tried diplomacy first. His message to the Ammonite king, recorded in Judges 11:12-13, was direct and reasonable. "What do you have against me, that you have come to me to fight against my land?" The king's response revealed the real issue behind their invasion. "Because Israel took away my land when they came up from Egypt, from the Arnon to the Jabbok and to the Jordan, now therefore restore it peaceably." Jephthah's reply was a masterpiece of historical argument. In Judges 11:15-27, he laid out Israel's legal claim to the disputed territory, explaining how they had tried to pass through peacefully but were forced to fight when attacked. He reminded the king that Israel had possessed the land for 300 years and asked pointedly, "I therefore have not sinned against you, and you do me wrong by making war on me. Let the Lord, the judge, decide this day between the people of Israel and the people of Ammon." But the Ammonite king wasn't interested in legal arguments or peaceful solutions. The diplomatic mission failed completely, and war became inevitable. At this crucial moment, something supernatural happened. Judges 11:29 records the divine empowerment. "Then the Spirit of the Lord was upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh, and passed on to Mizpah of Gilead, and from Mizpah of Gilead he passed on to the Ammonites. Victory was assured. God himself was leading Israel into battle. But at this moment of divine blessing, Jephthah made a vow that would turn his triumph into tragedy. His foolish promise in Judges 11:30-31 would haunt him forever. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, "If you will give the Ammonites into my hand, then whatever comes out from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace, from the Ammonites shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering." The vow was unnecessary. God had already promised victory through his Spirit. But Jephthah, perhaps influenced by years among pagan mercenaries, thought he needed to bargain with God like the heathen bargained with their idols. The battle was swift and decisive. Judges 11:32-33 describes the complete victory. So Jephthah crossed over to the Ammonites to fight against them, and the Lord gave them into his hand, and he struck them from Aroer to the neighborhood of Minnith, 20 cities, and as far as Abel-keramim, with a great blow. So the Ammonites were subdued before the people of Israel, but tragedy awaited at home. The moment that should have brought him the greatest joy became the source of unimaginable grief. Judges 11:34 records the heartbreaking scene. Then Jephthah came to his home at Mizpah, and behold, his daughter came out to meet him with tambourines and with dances. She was his only child. Besides her, he had neither son nor daughter. His daughter's noble response in Judges 11:36 revealed a faith that put her fathers to shame. And she said to him, "My father, you have opened your mouth to the Lord. Do to me according to what has gone out from your mouth, now that the Lord has avenged you on your enemies, the Ammonites." She was willing to die to honor her father's promise to God, even though that promise had been foolishly made. Even after Jephthah's great victory and personal tragedy, Israel's troubles weren't over. The tribe of Ephraim, always quick to take offense, was furious about being excluded from the campaign against the Ammonites. Their complaint in Judges 12:1 was harsh and threatening. The men of Ephraim were called to arms, and they crossed to Zaphon and said to Jephthah, "Why did you cross over to fight against the Ammonites and did not call us to go with you? We will burn your house over you with fire." This was the same complaint they had made to Gideon years earlier, but this time their threat was explicit and deadly. Unlike Gideon, who had deflected their anger with humble words and diplomatic praise, Jephthah met their aggression with matching force. His response in Judges 12:2-3 was blunt and uncompromising. And Jephthah said to them, "I and my people had a great dispute with the Ammonites, and when I called you, you did not save me from their hand. And when I saw that you would not save me, I took my life in my hand and crossed over against the Ammonites, and the Lord gave them into my hand. Why then have you come up to me this day to fight against me?" The battle was swift and brutal. When the surviving Ephraimites tried to flee back across the Jordan River, the Gileadites were waiting for them. What happened next became one of the most famous and deadly incidents in Israel's history. Judges 12:5-6 describes the linguistic death trap, and the Gileadites captured the fords of the Jordan against the Ephraimites. And when any of the fugitives of Ephraim said, "Let me go over," the men of Gilead said to him, "Are you an Ephraimite?" When he said no, they said to him, "Then say Shibboleth." And he said Sibboleth, for he could not pronounce it right. Then they seized him and slaughtered him at the fords of the Jordan. At that time 42,000 of the Ephraimites fell. A single word became a death sentence. The Ephraimites couldn't pronounce the esh sound in Shibboleth, saying Sibboleth instead. This tiny difference in dialect marked them for death at the river crossings. 42,000 men died over a pronunciation test. An entire generation of warriors killed by their own countrymen. After Jephthah's death, Three minor judges provided brief stability: Ibzan with his international marriages for 30 sons and 30 daughters, Elon for 10 peaceful years, and Abdon with his prosperous family of 40 sons and 30 grandsons. Riding donkeys. Israel's longest oppression began when the familiar pattern repeated. Judges 13:1 records their rebellion. And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord gave them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. 4 decades under foreign rule showed how far Israel had fallen spiritually and militarily. This time, God's solution would be different from anything seen before. Instead of calling an adult to be judge, he planned to raise up a deliverer from birth, a man set apart for a special mission before he was even conceived. The story began with a woman who had given up hope of ever having children. Judges 13:2-3 introduces the unlikely mother. There was a certain man of Zorah, of the tribe of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had no children. And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, "Behold, you are barren and have not borne children, but you shall conceive and bear a son." The angel's message was both wonderful and demanding. This wouldn't be an ordinary child, born in the usual way. Judges 13:4-5 records the special conditions that would govern his entire life. "Therefore be careful, and drink no wine or strong drink, and eat nothing unclean. For behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. No razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazirite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to save Israel from the hand of the Philistines." When Manoah prayed for confirmation, God granted his request. The angel's mysterious response in Judges 13:18, when asked his name, hinted at his true identity. And the angel of the Lord said to him, "Why do you ask my name, seeing it is wonderful?" The truth became clear when they offered their sacrifice. Judges 13:19-20 describes the supernatural revelation. So Manoah took the young goat with the grain offering and offered it on the rock to the Lord, to the one who works wonders, and Manoah and his wife were watching. And when the flame went up toward heaven from the altar, the angel of the Lord went up in the flame of the altar. Now Manoah and his wife were watching, and they fell on their faces to the ground. The promised child was born exactly as the angel had said. Judges 13:24-25 records his early years. "And the woman bore a son, and called his name Samson. And the young man grew, and the Lord blessed him. And the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him in Mahane Dan, between Zorah and Eshtaol." Samson's first recorded act as an adult was a decision that shocked his parents and violated everything they had taught him. His demand in Judges 14:1-2 was blunt. Samson went down to Timnah, and at Timnah he saw one of the daughters of the Philistines. Then he came up and told his father and mother, "I saw one of the daughters of the Philistines at Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife." His parents were horrified. Their response in Judges 14:3 showed their distress. But his father and mother said to him, "Is there not a woman among the daughters of your relatives or among all our people that you must go to take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines?" But Samson said to his father, "Get her for me, for she is right in my eyes." Unknown to anyone, God was working through Samson's disobedience. Judges 14:4 explains the divine plan. His father and mother did not know that it was from the Lord, for he was seeking an opportunity against the Philistines. At that time, the Philistines ruled over Israel. On the way to meet his bride, Samson encountered a young lion. What happened next demonstrated his supernatural power. Judges 14:5-6 records the miraculous feat. Then Samson went down with his father and mother to Timnah, and they came to the vineyards of Timnah. And behold, a young lion came toward him roaring. Then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and although he had nothing in his hand, he tore the lion apart as one tears apart a young goat. But he did not tell his father or mother what he had done. Later, he found honey in the lion's carcass and used this secret for a wedding riddle. When the Philistines couldn't solve it, they threatened his wife. Her betrayal led to Samson's violent response. Judges 14:19 records his revenge, and the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon and struck down 30 men of the town, and took their spoil, and gave the garments to those who had told the riddle. When his wife was given to another man, his retaliation was creative and devastating. Judges 15:4-5 describes his fox and torch revenge. So Samson went and caught 300 foxes and took torches, and he turned them tail to tail and put a torch between each pair of tails. And when he had set fire to the torches, he let the foxes go into the standing grain of the Philistines, and set fire to the shocks and the standing grain, as well as the olive orchards. This escalating cycle of revenge reached its climax when Judah's men bound Samson to appease their oppressors. His response became legendary. Judges 15:14-15 records the famous jawbone victory. Then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and the ropes that were on his arms became as flax that has caught fire, and his bonds melted off his hands. And he found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, and put out his hand, and took it, and with it he struck 1,000 men. Samson's weakness for foreign women continued with the Gaza prostitute, then reached its tragic climax with Delilah. The Philistine ruler's offer in Judges 16:5 was enormous, and the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, "Seduce him, and see where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to humble him, and we will each give you 100 pieces of silver." 3 times she asked for the secret of his strength. 3 times he gave false answers. 3 times he broke free easily when she tested his lies. Finally, worn down by her constant pressure, he revealed the truth. Judges 16:17 records his fatal confession. And he told her all his heart and said to her, "A razor has never come upon my head, for I have been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If my head is shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man." The end came while he slept in her lap. Judges 16:19-20 describes his downfall. She made him sleep on her knees, and she called a man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. Then she began to torment him, and his strength left him. And she said, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." And he awoke from his sleep and said, "I will go out as at other times and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had left him. Captured, blinded, and enslaved, Samson became entertainment for his enemies. But in prison, his hair began to grow, and so did his relationship with God. His final prayer in Judges 16:28 showed a changed heart. Then Samson called to the Lord and said, "O Lord God, please remember me, and please strengthen me only this once, O God, that I may be avenged on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." His last act was his greatest victory. Judges 16:30 records the climactic end. And Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." Then he bowed with all his strength, and the house fell upon the lords and upon all the people who were in it. So the dead, whom he killed at his death, were more than those whom he had killed during his life. With no judge to provide leadership, religious chaos followed Samson's death. The 17th chapter opens with a story of family theft and spiritual corruption that showed how completely Israel had lost its way. Judges 17:1-2 introduces Micah and his shocking confession. There was a man of the hill country of Ephraim whose name was Micah, and he said to his mother, "The 1,100 pieces of silver that were taken from you, about which you uttered a curse, and also spoke it in my ears, behold, the silver is with me. I took it, And his mother said, "Blessed be my son by the Lord." His mother's response was shocking, blessing him instead of punishing theft. Even worse, she used the stolen money to make idols while claiming to serve the Lord. Judges 17:3-4 describes her religious hypocrisy, and he restored the 1 to 100 pieces of silver to his mother. And his mother said, "I dedicate the silver to the Lord from my hand for my son, to make a carved image and a metal image. Now therefore I will restore it to you." So he took the silver back to his mother, and his mother took 200 pieces of silver and gave it to the silversmith, who made it into a carved image and a metal image. Micah created his own private worship center, complete with unauthorized religious objects. Judges 17:5 records his homemade religion. And the man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and household gods, and ordained one of his sons to be his priest. He was ignoring everything God had commanded about proper worship and proper priests. A wandering Levite accepted employment as Micah's private chaplain. Their agreement in Judges 17:10-11 showed complete abandonment of proper religious service. And Micah said to him, "Stay with me and be to me a father and a priest, and I will give you 10 pieces of silver a year and a suit of clothes and your living." And the Levite went in. When the tribe of Dan decided to abandon their assigned territory for easier conquest, they stole Micah's gods and hired away his priest. The Levite's betrayal was immediate. He abandoned his employer for a better position without any loyalty or conscience. The darkest story in Judges began with a domestic dispute that spiraled into unimaginable evil. Judges 19:1-2 introduces the tragic characters. In those days, when there was no king in Israel, a certain Levite was sojourning in the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, who took to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. And his concubine was unfaithful to him, and she went away from him to her father's house at Bethlehem in Judah, and was there some 4 months. After reconciling with his concubine, the Levite chose to spend the night in Gibeah rather than foreign Jerusalem. His reasoning seemed logical. Surely his fellow Israelites would treat him better than strangers. In Gibeah, only an old man offered hospitality. That night, the men of Gibeah surrounded the house with an evil demand. Judges 19:22 records their Sodom-like wickedness. As they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, worthless fellows, surrounded the house, beating on the door. And they said to the old man, the master of the house, "Bring out the man who came into your house, that we may know him." When the mob refused the host's shocking counteroffer of his daughter and the concubine, the Levite made his cowardly choice. Judges 19:25 records his ultimate betrayal, but the men would not listen to him. So the man seized his concubine and made her go out to them. And they knew her and abused her all night until the morning. And as the dawn began to break, they let her go. She died from her injuries, reaching toward the door where her husband was hiding safely. The Levite's response was horrific. He cut her dead body into 12 pieces and sent them throughout Israel, demanding justice while concealing his own. Cowardice. The dismembered body sent throughout Israel had its intended effect. The nation assembled in unprecedented unity. 400,000 men gathered to hear the Levite's carefully edited story and decide what to do about the crime. In Gibeah, when Benjamin refused to surrender the criminals, choosing to protect them instead, civil war became inevitable. The first 2 battles were disasters for Israel despite overwhelming numbers. 40,000 men died before they finally sought God's will. His answer was clear. Victory would come on the 3rd day. Using strategy instead of brute force, Israel set ambushes while a smaller force lured Benjamin away from their cities. The slaughter was total. Judges 20:46-47 records the devastating result. So all who fell that day of Benjamin were 25,000 men who drew the sword, all of them men of valor. But 600 men turned and fled toward the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon and remained at the rock of Rimmon 4 months. Victory created a new crisis. Israel had sworn not to give their daughters to Benjamin in marriage. Without wives, the surviving 600 men couldn't rebuild their tribe. Their solution involved attacking Jabesh-Gilead for not participating in the war, killing everyone except 400 virgins. When this wasn't enough, they organized kidnapping at Shiloh. Judges 21:20-21 describes their final solution. And they commanded the people of Benjamin, saying, "Go and lie in ambush in the vineyards and watch. If the daughters of Shiloh come out to dance in the dances, then come out of the vineyards and snatch each man his wife from the daughters of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin." The book ends with the phrase explaining Israel's complete moral collapse. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Without godly leadership, the nation had descended into chaos, violence, and moral bankruptcy. If this deep dive into Judges opened your eyes to new truths in God's Word, I'd love for you to hit that subscribe button and join our community of Bible explorers. There are so many more incredible stories waiting to be discovered together, and here's the thing. If this video impacted you, it could impact someone else too. Share it with a friend, a family member, or post it on your social media. You never know whose life might be changed by seeing these ancient stories in a fresh light. What part of Judges surprised you the most? Drop a comment below and let's discuss it. I read every single comment and love hearing your thoughts and insights. Thanks for taking this journey through one of the Bible's most challenging books. Until next time, keep digging deeper into God's incredible Word.